Hey everyone, and welcome to the studio. It has been a few weeks since I've made a video, so I am here to do a demo for you. I'm going to paint a nice fall scene. It's autumn here in North Georgia. I just got back from camping alongside a river in the mountains. It was gorgeous. I have so many reference photos and I'm really excited to start painting from them. By the way, I've been away from YouTube for a few weeks because we have been in the process of purchasing a camper, a trailer. We're going to take it on the road this summer, and I'm going to be painting and traveling. I can't wait. If you would like to see some videos from the trip, from the camping, let me know in the comments and let me know what you'd like to see. So we're really excited about this kind of new adventure we're going to embark on this year. So today I'm going to paint a fall scene, and I'm going to use a wet underpainting technique, and I want you to come closer, and I want to show you that right away. I already did the underpainting, but I want to show you what I'm using. Can you see these? I'm using Art Graf water-soluble pigment blocks. They are kind of like ink in a block. Is the best way to describe them. But what I want to show you is how little bit of pigment you need to get very, very vibrant color. So this is the primary color set, but you can also get them in neutrals, earth tones. Alright, so I just applied a little bit. I'm putting in a little bit of water and watch it explode with color. And you can see that I mixed the colors together, which you can do so you can get new colors. But it takes very little pigment and you get these wonderful results when you wet it. And you get some really fun and cool drips. If we can focus on the finished underpainting here, and you can see as it dried, I got some really interesting drips and things that I'm going to incorporate into the painting. So I've already done the underpainting. It is dry. I'm working on Uart sanded paper, 400 grit. Here's my reference photo, and this is my pastel tray. What I've done is I've pulled out my pastels in advance. I have a selection of darks, some reds for the trees. I think I'm going to make the trees a little bit more red than they are in the photo. Some colors that I can use for the sky and the mist on the river. I probably need another blue, which I'm going to go grab. And then, of course, here's the greens that I'm going to use for the rest of the painting, the trees that are in the distance. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll probably have to take a break in just a minute and go and grab some more, although I don't know, I might need a few more blues. We'll see how it goes. So the first thing that I always do with any painting is I start by reinforcing the dark areas, and in this case the dark areas happen to be the tree trunks and some of the foliage. So I'm going to come in and reestablish these tree trunks that I started putting them in very, very lightly in the underpainting. I'm not really worried about having the tree trunks be exactly the way they are in the photo, but I do want them to have an interesting arrangement of shapes and sizes. So let's make this one a little bit fatter. The smaller branches we can come in and put them in at the end. So I'll just put a few of the larger branches in. This is the edge of the river, so I'm going to actually darken it up a little bit so that we can then slip into the painting a little bit better. I'm also going to go ahead and, well, maybe I'm not going to. I'm going to put a little bit of the darker color in the foliage. So I'm going to use a dark red. As I said, I think I want to make the trees a little bit more red or orangey than they actually are. The foliage was just starting to change while we were there. So we're kind of at that early stage where there's still some green left in the trees. So I'll add a little bit of a dark green as well. So what I'm doing is I'm first establishing the darkest areas. I'm using a light touch. I'm using the side of the pastel, and I'm very gently adding layers so that you can still see the underpainting. Really, that is my goal. I want you to still see the colors in the underpainting, so I have to use a light touch. I'm going to add another layer of color to the tree trunks. I'm going to add a darker burgundy on top of the blue that's already there. And add a little bit of that on the ground as well. Okay. One other thing before I move on. I have a dark eggplant. By the way, most of the pastels that I'm using today are Cherry Ludwig pastels. And what I have done is I've selected my pastels that I want to use for the painting in advance. So I've pulled them out of a bigger box. I have all my pastels in one large box in the studio. And so before each painting, I like to choose a few of the pastels that I'm going to be using for the painting so that I can have a limited palette. Alright, I will be right back. I'm going to go grab some blue. Alright, now that I have all the darks in place, I'm going to start by developing what's in the distance. And if you can notice in the reference photo, there's a little bit of haze or mist coming off the river and then kind of disguising some of the distant trees. So I want to create this feeling of depth. So I'm going to begin with the sky. It was early morning, still kind of hazy and overcast. So I'm going to start by putting in this pale violet pastel, light value, and I'm going to come in and use it to start to break up the tree and create some sky holes. And one thing about sky holes, they can be tricky. They usually occur alongside the branches. So if I've established some of the branches so I can use that as a guide. I also can squint at my photo. If I squint, then those holes kind of jump into focus, right? And the light areas where the sky is, you can see a little bit better. So that's one other way to see where the sky holes should be. But one thing about sky holes I will tell you is they are tricky, and oftentimes I'll put them in and then I've got to come in and disguise them a little bit. Like put them in and then take them out. I'm also going to make them slightly darker, putting in a this is a blue, but it's a little slightly darker, not very much. But right now you can see all those sky holes are kind of popping out. And so what I'm going to do is come back with those reds that I already used, some of the duller, darker reds, and cover up some of those sky holes. So put them in, but then soften them and take them out. And that makes them feel a little bit more natural. And we'll come and we're going to address this tree in a little bit more detail, but let's start from the back and work our way forward. So we have a distant tree mass. Now trees in the distance, when they're covered in, shrouded in mist, are going to get lighter and cooler and duller and softer. So I'm actually going to put a blue-green, and then I'm going to use a very light touch with a nice blue-gray. And I know that it carries on behind the tree, so I'm going to make sure that I carry that blue-gray behind the tree. And then I'm going to add a grayed down violet just to kind of enhance that feeling of mist in the distance. But then it gets a little bit more, you can start to see the greens, but I still want to use a lighter green. So here's a lighter grayed down green. All the while I'm trying to promote this feeling of mist covering these the trees on the other side of the river. Now, as we come closer, we start to be able to see the green and the color of the trees a little bit more detailed. So I'm taking a darker green, and I'm establishing the distant bank there. And I notice that these trees here are starting to change color, and they're starting to get a little bit more of that yellow fall color. So I'm using a yellow-green to begin with. And I like this one really kind of golden yellow tree. One thing I like, I didn't mention earlier, what I like about using those art graph and being able to start my painting with a really rich, bold color, which is what it really allowed me to do, is now I can start to tone it down if I want to do that. So starting bolder than you really want to end up is always a good way to work with pastel. Because you can always tone something down or get something lighter, but it's really hard to kind of increase the vibrancy and the darkness. It's easier to work from darker and bolder to get, and then go to the lighter. So I'm leaving a lot of that yellow underpainting in that one area. If I really want that to stand out a little bit more, what I have to do is darken what's behind it. So I couldn't get any lighter or brighter with the pastels that I have in my selection, but what I can do is take something that's darker and do some negative painting and then start to pull those tree shapes out of the mist. So that's another way you can do it. Alright, so we've got the sky established, we've got the trees on the opposite bank. So now let's work a little bit on our river, and there are a couple of rocks in there, so let's go ahead and put in a couple of dark shapes that will then cover up with some of the water. So we'll establish some of those first, and then we will look at the colors in the water happen to be a combination of a reflection, combination of the colors of the bottom of the river, also a reflection of the trees, and a little bit of influence of the color directly overhead, which is the sky. So if I can use all of those to my advantage, and I had mentioned that I needed a little bit more blue, because there's a little bit of blue up in the sky, not very much. I'll just add a little bit of blue. I do see a lot of green in the water, so I'm going to add a very little bit of green. Again, I'm letting some of the underpainting do some of the work, using a very light touch. What else do I see? I see a reflection of this yellow tree. I'll put that in there. But I also see, and this is the fun part, some of the white water, so I'm going to use a little bit of a lighter blue. Let's go a little bit darker first. To put some of that white water in, we're going to have a little bit of white water coming around those rock shapes that I pretty well covered up. That's okay. Some of the white water. It was interesting, but being along this side of this river, it was so loud. It was almost unbelievably loud. We had to talk loud, but it was very beautiful. So it was worth it. Let's see, where else? There's a bit of white water in here. I'm not going to use white because that would be too bright, right? So I'm using a pale blue. Now, the other thing that is really cool about this scene is that there is a little bit of mist rising off the river. So I'm going to take this same blue, I think this should be the right value, and I am going to scumble, meaning very, very lightly, use this color and pull it over the layers that are already there, which is why I had to do the background first. If I wanted to put this mist, I have to have that background in place. And I'm just using this pale blue to kind of pull the mist up from the water. There's a little bit of a brighter bit of white water right in here. So I'm going to just press a little bit harder. I also want to darken the bank just ever so slightly so that we can realize that it's the bank. But again, it's shrouded in the mist, so you don't really see it in a lot of detail. Let's pull that rock back in there. Alright, so where are we at? We've done the darks, we've done the lights. I think I'm going to brighten up the sky a little bit more with a pale yellow, or it's kind of more of a yellow-orange. And I want to push the distant trees into the mist by pulling that color, scumbling over that area. I've got the river in place. This tree feels a little bit too bright right now for the moodiness of this scene. So I'm going to lighten it just a little bit, kind of cover up more of that underpainting than I initially thought I would. But I really need to because it doesn't look like it's part of that same misty type scene. So that's an adjustment I have to make. That yellow would be great if it was a bright sunny day. But on a moody day like this, we really don't want it to be so bright. Alright, now we're at the tree and our foreground. So I'm going to just add a little bit of green to our foreground. There's a little bit of grass right in here. A dull green. I don't need to use too much. It's not really about the foreground. I want to reinforce a little more detail on the tree trunks. So I'm adding a lighter, kind of duller, grayed down, brownish color. Add a couple more branches. Reinforce some of the darks on some of these branches. Using the dark blue for this. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a quick spray of workable fixative. And I like to use Blair Very Low Odor workable fixative. I'm only going to spray the dark part, which is what? The tree and the foreground. And we're going to let that dry, and I'm going to come right back and we'll finish the painting. Alright, so the workable fixative only takes a few minutes to dry, not really even that long. And why do I put it on there? Because what I want to do is create an illusion of texture. And the workable fixative tends to darken and dull these areas where I sprayed it. But another fun thing that it does is when I layer more pastel on top of it, it will skip over those darker areas, and I kind of get a feeling of texture. Sometimes it's really hard to see in the video what I'm talking about, but it is a fun technique that helps promote an illusion of texture. And I will often use it more than once on a painting, like in other words several layers of fixative and pastel. I'm trying to add a little bit of this, I'm using some duller reds, brick reds, orangey reds. I don't want to use really bright colors because remember what I mentioned earlier, that this is a moody, foggy, or misty morning. The sun is not out bright, so there's no real direct bright sunlight on these trees, so that they feel a little bit dark, a little bit dull. Even though there's some red and orange involved in them, I'm not going to use the brightest, most intense reds or oranges that I have. Those I would say for a sunny day. This is a moody day, a misty day. So I'm going to use the duller colors. So I'm gradually getting a little bit lighter with the colors. And I'm starting to get smaller and smaller with my marks. I'm not going to paint every single leaf on the tree. That would drive me crazy. But what I want to do is make the viewer believe that they are seeing a tree with foliage. And so if I paint a few leaf shapes, which is what I'm going to do right now, then the idea is that when the viewer looks at this painting, they can see these few leaf shapes that I have sticking off the edges and where I really want you to look. And your brain kind of fills in the rest and says, oh, okay, that's just a tree filled with that certain kind of leaf. You are painting a suggestion of the foliage rather than every single leaf. Makes it easier, and it actually makes it more enjoyable for the viewer, because then they can participate. So when I'm painting the tree, I'm going to go back and forth with the tree and the sky holes. I'm going to put a few more back in. You know, I took some out, I covered them up. I'm going to put a few more in, but this time when I put them in, I'm going to tap them gently with my finger to soften them so that the sky holes have softer edges, so that they don't look like Christmas ornaments pasted on top of the tree. One thing I'm noticing that this area here is more in the shadow, so I'm going to use a darker green to put in some of this foliage on the right hand side. And I'll look at the painting and I want to say, you know, how much more do I need? How much more detail does it need? I want to lead the viewer's eye kind of around, like up the bank, up into the tree, and back around. So let's kind of do some finishing marks to get that to happen. So I'm going to add a little bit of a brighter mark of green right here in the grass. I could also use a harder pastel to kind of paint in some linear marks to represent some of the grasses, so that your eye knows, oh, okay, I see a few blades of grass. That area is grassy. I want to pull your eye up the tree, so I can do that by putting a few harder edges of the brown that I see in the tree. I also see some kind of mossy stuff growing on the tree. That's kind of fun. So I can put a few kind of gray down colors to suggest some of those mosses, lichens that are growing on the tree trunk. Once your eye gets up into the tree, I want to direct your eye back down around. So I'm going to reinforce some of those branches, making them a little bit darker so that the eye will follow them. I don't need to worry about the areas around the edges of the painting, because I'm trying to direct your eye in a certain direction, and that's not to take your eye off the page. So I'm pulling these branches down to this area on the opposite bank. So what I need to do is I need to make this stand out a little bit more. Remember earlier I darkened what was behind it, and I'm going to just kind of reinforce that darker area. And I'm going to come in and just make a, you know what it really needs? It needs some branches so that we can see that it's a tree. So I'm using a dull violet, which works really well with the yellow, let's complement, to put a few more branches so that this area stands out a little bit more. And we can kind of pull the eye back around to the start by maybe reinforcing some of those some of the white water, add a little bit more of that blue in there. It's a nice color. And maybe just reinforce a couple of those rock shapes, which hopefully the idea is it's pulling your eye back around to the beginning so that we have a nice circular composition. I made this a little bit too dark, so I'm covering that up a little bit more. And I think I'm going to stop right there. So here we have a misty, moody autumn landscape. So I hope you've enjoyed that. If you like this video, if you like what you see here, join me on my Patreon page. I have a Patreon group. I post something new every day, a weekly demo, a weekly challenge. I've been doing it for 3 years, so there's tons of content. So join me on Patreon if you want more of this. I've really enjoyed painting for you today, and have fun and let's paint.